Good morning and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers. I'm Indu Saxena, Senior Fellow and the Chief Operating Officer at the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers. As we know, after winning a full-fledged majority of Republican Party, which secured 312 seats, President-elect Trump has been in the process of nominating his cabinet picks. Today's discussion is focused on the shifts and continuum in America's engagement in the Indo-Pacific with new administration, second term of the President-elect Trump. It is very, very obvious that the Indo-Pacific region will remain crucial for America and from second term. Based on Trump's first and election campaign, as we have been witnessing since the last 6 or 8 months, it is clear that the Trump administration will prioritize America first and make America great again. So today's discussion is focused on Trump's second term and the Indo-Pacific engagements. Before diving into the substance, I'm pleased to introduce our stellar panelists for today. We have Professor Yoichiro Sato from Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University. He is the Dean of the Department and the Graduate School of Asia Pacific Studies. He held various senior positions in the Asia Pacific institutes and think tanks. He has authored and edited several books on Asian geopolitics. He has joined us from Japan, Tokyo. We have Ambassador Gurjeet Singh. Ambassador Gurjeet Singh is a former Indian diplomat with 37 years of experience. He has been the ambassador of India to Germany, Indonesia, ASEAN, and Ethiopia, and the African Union, besides having been in Japan, Sri Lanka, Kenya, and Italy on assignments. He was the Sherpa for the first 2 India-Africa summits. He comments on current TV events and in journals. He is widely published authors on geopolitics and international relations. We have Dr. Mohammad Jahidul Islam Khan. He has joined us from Dhaka. He is a visiting research fellow at the Reading University, United Kingdom, and the registrar at the American International University, Bangladesh in Dhaka. He has widely published author, commentator, and his education is from U.S. Air Force College in Alabama and in the Dhaka and also in the United Kingdom. So we have a wonderful panelist here to discuss this important topic here. And now I would like to invite our panelists to give a first-hand remarks on the Trump's second presidency, what it looked like for the Indo-Pacific. So that will be a limited remarks for 5 minutes. Just what you think about the second term. I would start with Professor Sato, please. Professor Sato.
Okay, thank you very much. Good to see you again, Indu. Just one correction. I'm no longer the dean. I'm a former dean. Yeah, so I'm out of prison.
Noted, sir.
Anyway, I think for Japan, the 2 most interesting issues about the President Trump's nomination of some of the key positions are first the nomination of the Senator Rubio to the Secretary of State, and I think the other one would be the nomination of Mr. Mike Waltz to the National Security Advisor positions. Japan is very closely watching at these 2 nominations. And first, I think the Rubio's nomination indicates that the Trump really needs someone who basically very closely holds the line with him. So this will really change the State Department approach towards China, which developed under the Secretary Blinken in the Biden administration. The Biden administration took some hard lines toward China, but it was always doing so as a negotiation leverage, and they always had a negotiated solution in the background. Whereas I think the Rubio's appointment will likely bring the US foreign policy toward China back into the days of Pompeo, during which the US was looking for China's weak spots for the sake of finding weak spots and bash more. So the China will have a very hard time in dealing with the United States because the US government will be full of hawks and no doves. And I think for that matter, the appointment of Treasury Department will be also of Japan's interest because the Treasury Secretary in the Republican administration, like the Bush administration and even Trump 1.0, served the role of the dove. And that's because Treasury Secretary is concerned about Chinese purchase and holdings of the Treasury bonds. That's America's Achilles heel. But it's quite expected that the Treasury Secretary in Trump 2.0 will play even lesser role in overall foreign policy making compared to the Trump 1.0. So China will really have no kind of a channel of communication into the US administration. China will end up listening to the US monologue and maybe just counter argue rather than really negotiate anything. And I think Mike Waltz is very interesting because of his background with the ties with Indian business sector. And I think India is very keenly looking at this appointment, nomination, and eventual appointment if that happens. But I think in Japan, he's not well known. And from what I could gather, I think that he is overly raising the expectation of the US in terms of its growing ties with India. I think he is seriously looking at the possibility of US-India alliance, and I think that's a bar too high, and I think sooner or later the US will find out that the approach toward India needs to be more realistic in the light of India's growing role in such meetings as G20, India's continued role in expanded the BRICS, expanded BRICS grouping, and limited but substantial cooperation in terms of working with countries which want to diversify away from the dollar-dominated global economy. So for those reasons, I think the new appointment will be a very critical thing to pay attention to.
Thank you, Professor Sato. And we will discuss your points of the China hawk as newcomers and the Secretary of State and Defense Secretary. And before that, I would like to move to Ambassador Singh for his initial remarks. Ambassador Singh, over to you, please.
Thank you, Professor Sada, for having me. I heard Professor Sato very carefully, and I have learned from what he has said. So just to put it briefly, as my article on this said, there is a comfort in India with Trump because of what we achieved with very hard work in Trump 1.0. It was not easy, but we achieved it, right? So there's a comfort. Second thing is, I agree with Professor Sato that ultimately it is the people that he appoints which will make a difference. And in addition to the posts he mentioned, I think the Director of Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and I think who he will appoint as Commerce Secretary and Labor Secretary. I think these are going to be extremely important for India. Now, I think India is not looking at the US out of an Indo-Pacific prism for now. India is looking from an Indian prism. And certainly in our engagement with the US, we would like to see a clear vision of how they will engage with the Indo-Pacific and, as Professor Sato said, China, because those are critical to us. Now, we must remember that the Quad Summit is to be held in India. We changed places with the US in 2024. So 2025, if they are serious about the Quad, which means the Indo-Pacific for them, then Trump should be in India very soon. I'm looking at that with a question mark. I think what we have seen is already Trump has appointed a new ambassador for Israel, announced one, and appointed a special envoy for West Asia. And they're all speaking to Ukraine. And now even the Germans are speaking to Putin. So there is something happening. But I haven't seen an envoy appointed for the Indo-Pacific. I haven't seen an appointment within the State Department like, Biden had done. So maybe this will come. But obviously, since there is no war on in the Indo-Pacific, he is focusing on West Asia and Ukraine for the time being, and our turn would come. Finally, I think we would like to have a good relationship with the United States, and we would ensure that that contributes to a good Indo-Pacific policy. Secondly, as I said, the Quad and how much commitment the Trump administration shows to it, very important. Again, that will determine the extent to which we can go to the Indo-Pacific. And finally, I think India would expect the Trump administration to recognize Indian primacy in South Asia as a real challenge to China. So I think those are the contours which I have written about and which I believe will be the main tenets of strategic policy to the US, trade and all that, diaspora, I'll come to later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh, for your later in discussion. And now I will section with Dr. Jai.
Can you hear me?
Dr. Jai.
Yeah. All right. So you were distorted for a bit. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Indo. It's been great to be back in Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers Forum once again. With sympathy to Professor Sato of getting out of the prison as a dean. I can fully relate to that. My last appointment while I was serving in the Air Force was a dean of Aviation and Air Force Aviation and Space University, and now after university, the background depicts my university. I'm also out from that prison, but in another prison. I have a teaching assignment and also a registrar position. So I'm fully sympathetic with you. And having said that, let me just go into more substantial part of it. As a reader of politics and international relations, how do I see this term victory? And I'll try and bring it from a different perspective that has been discussed so far. And I'm basically a constructivist, not a liberal or although I have some inclination with realism and the liberalism, but my basic thought process and the understanding of the world is through the lenses of constructivism. So I find the re-election of Donald Trump is ironically aligned with the famous proposition by Frantz Fanon, the 1967 scholar, French and American scholar, who once said that it is at the heart of the national consciousness that the international consciousness grows. And this was in his book, National Culture. So why I say that? Because the whole notion of nervousness about Trump coming in America was much more prevalent in the international arena. Yet the American polity, American voters, in large numbers, I mean, very surprising for someone that Trump has also won the popular vote. So that is a reality, and that has come from whatever way you define from the voters in Michigan, Muslim voters in Michigan's, punishing the Democrats, or whatever way you define, or Trump's last minute swing of the Hindu voters of with the tweet about the Bangladesh, but that has happened. The national consciousness of the American people has defined what will be their international consciousness and taking of the worldview. So that sort of begs the question: where will this person who has been put in the office, national consciousness, will respect the national consciousness that emerged, for example, a small country like Bangladesh? Whether it will respect the national consensus that comes with through a democratic process in small country like Nepal. And I'll touch on to these small nations, global South nations, only because that is where it will be. It is peripheral. Because we have already heard and seen how they will be more aligned with India or with some other countries. The global South, which has been a very good voice for the humanity, remains absent in Trump's narrative of our worldview. So this is a contradiction this is a contradiction that which will unfold in the days to come under the Trump 2.0. How does Trump view that the very power of the national consciousness of the American people that has put him in power, whether he respects that same power? For example, in the case of Bangladesh, where there has been a recent upsurge of the student-led movement, ousting the previous prime minister, who is now in refuge in India. Very sensitive issue for the country. And how does he take on? And we see a lot of debates coming on with that one. The first point is the value-based diplomacy that has been at the center of American sort of Indo-Pacific policy. And if you just read the last Quad declaration, which was India itself, the other countries, and it reads like that: we seek a region where no country dominates and no country is dominated, one where all countries are free from coercion and can exercise their agency to determine their future. This was sort of premised on the understanding that these are alliance of democracies. Now, how much that will be respected or how much that will be followed, given that we know that the diplomacy that the Trump 1.0 was basically a transactional diplomacy, based on transactional values. So that is another area in which small countries like Bangladesh or Nepal, Sri Lanka, others, who probably do not feature much in the radar of Trump's eyes, will have to find out in the coming. So that is another area where I think we'll need to find out what happens in the days. Of course, there is some validity of analyzing, based on personality or who is getting appointed, and as has been outlined by other two speakers. I, as an academic, would be like seeing things from a very much fundamental point of view. The third is, of course, whether the election rhetorics, which we have seen, translates into policy. Sometimes we often hear a lot of things during the election, a lot of apprehensions, a lot of narratives, a lot of predictions and forecasting and expert opinions comes up. How much of that translates into policy needs to be seen. We have seen the GSP sanction of India happen during the Trump era. We've seen some of the very cozy relationship with India at the same time, some of the very unexpected thing happening. So the point around for Trump 2.0, or for Trump anyway, there's one very good thing, which is he's unpredictable. He swings. He can make a decision which nobody can predict. So, and that is where that is probably, and he uses it very wisely, or whatever one would say, wittily, or one would say very other way around. That unpredictable predictability element in Trump's characteristics, or the policy making, or the the way he conducts his business, makes it very difficult for any analyst to actually sort of this is going to happen and this is going to be like that. That will be my initial remarks. Over to you, Indo. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jai, that you touched upon so many things about this, starting from value-based diplomacy to the interest-based. I guess it's versus it will be going on. And there is in the domestic politics is a much controversial kind of things. That's the nominations and the pick by President-elect Trump, how they are going to do. Some are the newcomer, with have a little experience, or with have a no experience at the senior, holding the senior positions, like the nomination of a defense secretary. So, so let me start with after listening all of you, let me start with that first. We will discuss the military posture and the trade, and then we will go to the bilateral. I know that where we have so many small skirmishes or the tensions in the bilateral, not with the United States, but in South Asia itself, like India, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and where Trump stands for that. And in Japan, if we see that is a prime minister, though President Biden is meeting in the Lima in the Peru at the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. But again, with the in Japan, how do we see when comes with the spending, the military spending? Because Trump always insists on the allies and partners to pay their fair share in the alliances. So once we will talk about the alliances, and another about the China hawkish nominations that Professor Sato mentioned about Secretary Marco Rubio and Republican Mike Waltz as a national security advisor. So how do you see that China will be preparing for the second term of Trump? What China see is like more of trade. Yeah, we know that Trump announced that there will be 20% more trades, and that's also the concern. Can be the concern for India that Dr. Jaid raised that in the first presidency, Trump sanctions on India as well. So we will take both remarks here from our panelists on military posture, how China is preparing itself in terms of the military and the trade, and also that how India sees that, because in Indo-Pacific, India has a prominent place. So I would expect Ambassador Singh will take that point. So I will start again with the Professor Sato. What else you see in the preparation, how China is preparing itself in the military, in the trade? You are muted, sir.
sorry about that. I think China is very well anticipating that the U.S. will continue on the path of the military spending increase under the Trump administration. But also, U.S. allies have come under pressure to increase their respective budget. And Japan, under the previous Prime Minister Kishida, had already pledged to double the defense budget between 2022 and 2027. So Japan is very much on that path of defense spending increase. What Japan didn't have to face for 4 years of the Biden administration was the request from the US to increase the host nation support for the stationing of the US troops in Japan. Japan's currently paying about 50% of the cost of the US troops in Japan, depending on how to categorize various payments. But the Trump has said previously during his first administration that Japan should pay 4 times the current level. And that means 200% of the US cost of stationing troops in Japan. So the US will make surplus if Japan actually raises that much. And this is something Japan is going to have to resist and try to convince the US that that's unreasonable demand. And in fact, that really raises the issue of alliance credibility. So trying not to, give into this while focusing on its own defense buildup is the current priority of Japan.
Thank you, sir. Ambassador Singh, what's your thoughts on this?
So, India is not a formal ally of the United States. So perhaps, and we also don't have American bases. So like say Germany or Japan have. So expectations from the United States, as Professor Sato said, are much higher. At the same time, I think the Trump administration wanted India to diversify their defense purchases. So please remember, India is among the biggest defense markets now. So that is an important criteria. We buy much more than many other countries. And we were buying mostly from Russia. So the Americans have been persistent that we should diversify. And over the last few years, even before the Ukraine crisis, India had started diversifying and looking more at Europe, particularly France, and a lot to the United States. With the United States, the deliveries are quick and decisions are fast and everything is G2G, but it's expensive and there is no transfer of technology. So you just buy off the shelf. So we want that the relationship to become more equal. That if we are buying such large amount of things, there has to be some development in India. Now, I think under the Biden administration, this was somewhat understood. So when India started pushing exports from its defense sector, today the United States is our biggest market. I mean, our export thrust is very small and we are not exporting huge weapon systems, but where parts are concerned, elements are concerned, which go into larger systems. In India, find the United States companies are very welcoming. But we want, for instance, the aircraft engines from GE, the 414 engines. Those transfers of technology have stalled. They're not happening. So I think on defense, India is ready to buy much more from the United States, but we want the transaction not to be one-sided. We want there to be responses to India's concern. If you want to replace Russia, you also need to do what Russia used to do for us, and not just say buy and go home. So I think that is important. The second thing is we remember that it was Trump administration, Trump 1.0, which started the 2+2 with India. The foreign and defense ministers meeting with India was started in Trump's time. Secondly, it was the Trump administration which declared India the, I think, what do they call it, a strategic, they give it a name, strategic trade authorized tier 1 partner. This happened in 2018, which allows you to access dual use technology without so much of licensing problems. So I think that was a realization. But now, as Professor Sato and I think Dr. Zaid also pointed out, the crux is in what will be, how it will be implemented, what will really happen. And the policy seems good, our comfort seems high, but you need to make sure that this would happen. And Professor Sato correctly pointed out that, with China, there is a hawkish reputation of the Trump nominees. But will they remain hawkish, or after settling Ukraine, calming down West Asia, Trump will also cut a deal with China? Then where does that leave the Indo-Pacific? So I think that is something that we need to be cautious. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. That just I want to make a lot of remarks on this one. That if the United States sees a deal with China under Trump administration that you mentioned, given that China is not giving up its ambitions of Chinese dream or the Chinese assertiveness in South Asia and Indian Ocean or anywhere in the South China Sea. So what that compels America or that forces the United States to do something. So I think which in my argument, I don't see any big deal that is going to be cordial relation between China and the United States, giving these geopolitical tensions. And on top of that, the trade tension that is coming on because he already announced in his election campaigning. So we will talk more on this. If you have any remarks on this, please go ahead, and then I will invite Dr. Jahid for his remarks.
Thank you. So, when you deal with somebody who has got a reputation of being, what did Dr. Zahid say? Something which is undependable, you see, and also somebody who's transactional, then please remember, there is no ideology in this. If you can get along with Putin, you can also get along with Xi. We should not discount that. And simply the trade wars, as Dr. Zahid rightly pointed out, last time when he was clamping down on China, he also clamped down on India, and our GSP was removed and never came back. Even in Biden administration, it never came back. So I think India works with Trump on a basis of realism. With the Biden administration, in the last year or so, there has been a spate of ideological positions taken by what is called the deep state, which the Indian administration was not happy with. But with Trump, that has never happened so far. I'm not saying it can't happen. It hasn't happened. So I think the most cautious policy is to be happy, have comfort, but as they say, trust but verify. So the verification will be in the actual policies that they follow. And again, to answer your question another way, if the Americans don't play ball on Indo-Pacific, I think India-Japan relations have been strong, whether America was there or not. And now Australia can be added to that. So I think three of us will always work together in the Indo-Pacific, even if the Americans pivoted out. So I think the ball game is so clear, and I think even if the Americans were to make a deal with China, I think the problems India has with China or Japan has with China are not going to go away. So we'll have to deal with those problems with or without America. So I think that is the realism that I would look at. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll come to you again in the next round for some of the other issues. Now I would like to invite Jahid. Dr. Jahid, what do you comment on this?
Thank you. I think it's very interesting, but I like to make two distinctions. First is, of course, on the military side, the way the US role as a military power in the Southeast, in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, in that area, is not same as here, and that has a theoretical background. Actually, as academics, I would put a theoretical background as well. If you mark and reasonably proven over the evidence background. Why I say that? Because Japan, Korea, and other parts, Philippines, and to a certain extent the Southeast Asians, deterrence or security balance or any other things is intertwined with the US from long time. That has not been the case for the South Asian region. That has not been the case even with the rivalry, intense rivalry between India and China. Even at the height of the Rohingya crisis, nobody invited any extra-regional power here. Although we have a Burma Act, this is supported by the argument of, as I say always, the Barry Buzan and the Ole Weber's theory of regional security complex, where you have regional powers, aspiring global powers, who would like to borrow power from the outside to the extent, but not allow them to penetrate the region, maintain their own sphere of influence. So that is what is the theory tells us. And we see that happening in the South Asia, in this South Asian region very much. Although there are compelling reasons sometimes, which would appear from an external point of view, reasons for the extra regional powers to come here and play, none of these countries have actually invited it or have showed on it. So that it doesn't negate the reality that under the Modi government, and I was doing that study for some time, the defense cooperation of India and the United States, it has increased manifold. Even to the extent of, the ship maintenance, I think it was last year only, big contracts are dished out to the Indian companies where US ships are coming and getting, serviced and all kinds of. So India has become a contractual partner in defense collaborations, but not as much as it used to be, as Ambassador Singh was rightly saying. It has been invested with the Russians. And that comes also evident when you see the 1971 Treaty of Friendship with the USSR and India. It has been important for security guarantee and also security cooperations and the arms and helping each other in terms of security or war. India doesn't believe in that kind of allianceship anymore. India's reality is to maintain its strategic autonomy and partner, not enter into alliance. That, I'm afraid, is likely to be tested in this Trump era. It's my prediction. It's my thinking only that there could be some push that how much we get close to, whether at the expense of China and the open competition mode with China for and the mode of US mode of competition with China. Overarching reality on the defense cooperation, defense side and the military side is not same compared to the Southeast Asia and South Asia. The main issue in the Southeast Asia, of course, remains with Taiwan, Japan, the nuclear deterrence. And as I was saying, I was in a conference today in the morning, and I was hearing from the scholars, the talks whether the Japan will go nuclear for her own defense, nuclear deterrence. South Korea, to some extent, there are talks on that. So that is a different sort of ball game where we have South Asia, where we have two nuclear powers, including China, where they have their own balance, deterrence, and other kind of theories, and probably wouldn't like to get anybody else into that big game of security and forces, limiting it only in the transactional mode. All right. Can you, so that would be my argument on this. Things, if you are, Indo, are you here? So I think there is a sort of a technical
Why don't you
glitch.
carry on, Professor? She'll be back. Carry on.
We can carry on that discussions. And I mean, let me just give the floor to Professor Sato on the nuclear deterrence things and Japan's aspiration to have its own nuclear deterrence. Is that Japan, or how much of that is it? Okay, we'll no more be under the umbrella of United States nuclear protection, but it will be our own. Is there a thought of that nature in Japan, sir?
I really don't think that Japan is looking for a nuclear power status anytime soon, and especially under the current political situation, it's suicidal for the ruling LDP to even mention about nuclear armament, and yeah, and even allowing the U.S. nukes onto Japanese soil under the current domestic political circumstance would be too much of a challenge for the ruling party, despite the growing threat of nuclear weapons from China, North Korea, and all those issues, and even the possibility of the rising support for nuclear armament in South Korea. Despite all that, Japanese domestic politics is still very strongly against nuclear armament of the country.
Indo, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Now I would like to take some regional questions. Looking at the Bangladesh situations, and hopefully we'll get some remarks from Ambassador Singh. Ambassador Singh, that you mentioned that now in Trump 2.0, there will be a realistic the partnership, and India is looking forward to more in a practical manner. I just want you to your remarks on India-Canada diplomatic rift and the Pannu case in the United States. So in the last 1 year, we have seen some geopolitical gaps in the conversation from Indian and US side. How do you see that it is going to support? Because yes, we are agree with the point that the separatist movement from any other soil against India, yes, if partners of India should not be that should not be accepted in any case. And I know that you will also make that comment. And the second one, I am just adding on this one. The first I will take that, and the second one, out from this group of four in Japan. If I'm not
can you put your question in the chat?
Okay, sure.
Okay, so let me answer, because this is getting very wide now. So
Okay.
in my opening remarks, I said that my ambition is that the Trump administration would show greater understanding of Indian primacy in South Asia. Now, that doesn't include Canada, but what do I mean by that? I think India was stung of having stuck with the Americans in Afghanistan, and then the Biden administration just quit. leaving us in the lurch without any discussion. So the limitations of the Quad were exposed by American unilateralism in Afghanistan. So then onwards, we said, okay, we will coordinate in the Indo-Pacific, but other areas we will take case-by-case autonomous decisions. Now, on the case of Pakistan, the Americans often adopt a policy which is inimical to India. In the case of Sri Lanka and Maldives, they were sitting back quietly when there was anti-India tirade. But when the trouble started, then they all came to India saying, will you please help to bail them out, because the Chinese are not doing so. And in the case of Bangladesh, there was definitely totally different approach, which the Americans followed and India followed. Now, and Myanmar, another case, totally different approach. India follows, the United States follow. So the United States is not making a positive contribution in settling South Asia into stability. They must come behind India and look at the region from India's perspective, because we are the challengers to China. Not Pakistan, not Sri Lanka, not Maldives, not anybody else. So if we have to contend with China, say in Myanmar or in the Indian Ocean, then you have to listen to us. So we hope that coherence will come now. Now, you brought in the issue of Canada. Now, Canada, I don't know whether you want to treat it like a geopolitical issue, but yes, any country fomenting secessionism in India is not a friend of India. And we would expect friendly governments to act against such elements. Having said that, I think there is a larger complication which is going to come from the manner in which the Trump statements have dealt with Indian diaspora. Now, Indian diaspora has two parts. One is people who are American citizens or citizens of UK, Canada, wherever, right? And the second are the NRIs, who are Indians living abroad. Now, Trump seems to be very positive towards the diaspora. Those who vote for him, those who fund him, those who are willing to join his cabinet, ugly bar, Trump Sarkar, that kind of crowd. It is the NRIs who are actually voters in India who are going to be negatively impacted if Trump implements, sending out illegals, clamping down on, what do you call them, H1B visas, spouse visas. That impacts on the Indian diaspora who are Indian citizens. So there are two different impacts, one positive, one negative. So we have to be very cautious. We can't say that is good and this is also good. No. Now, when you start discussing some of the people who you mentioned, they are the fringe elements of the first part. And we are not clear why the Canadian and even the US governments do not act against them under law. We don't get extradition requests accepted. We don't get, even attacks on Indian consulates are not really followed up. There is no legal remedy. You know who they are. Whereas I must say, in some of the European countries, when this kind of thing happens, the rule of law seems to be more clearly implemented. So yes, in the US and Canada, I would expect more conversations which are quiet and diplomatic rather than public pronouncements, and deal with these issues concerning concerns of India as well on these issues. And then you will have a robust, positive relationship. Thank you.
Yeah, so rightly said, we have a divergence in India-US relation regarding to the regional context in South Asia. Even you mentioned all these things in Myanmar, in Bangladesh. Whatever happened in Bangladesh, the interim government that is established there, And since we don't have any clue when the new election will be there, and we have the a very learned thinker and a thought leader from the Bangladesh. So let's get his views on this one. I'm reading this NDTV headlines for today. Indian Americans to urge Trump administration for sanctions against Bangladesh. This is not, I don't want to go on these headlines, but we know these are some divergence. Like whatever happened in Bangladesh was not like in favor, if I say the favor or the of India, and what India didn't think about that, okay, that will happen with the Sheikh Hasina government. So it was very surprised and shocking moment for that. And I don't know how many, but most of the Indians were there. So Dr. Zahir, how do you see that the interim government and the Trump relationships and the how it will go? Because
All right, so thank you very much. I hope you can hear me
Supported.
loud and clear this time.
it was supported. Now, what do you see in the new administration?
Yeah, so can you hear me loud and clear now? I thought the audio was not working that
Yeah.
time. All right, so a couple of things. I think let me just put it in different segments and the contradictions, misinformations, and the way the narratives are getting created. And then I will put in some evidence from the ground to sort of make your own meaning of the world that you live in, because the social world is interpretive. So I can't really convince you unless you see all the data. And if it is not a large n data, if it is, if you opt to rely making the meaning based on small n, so that's a different thing. Having said that, the fact remains South Asia is the least integrated region in the world. So that tells you two things. First, South Asia doesn't have a leader. Despite having a neighborhood first policy for India, from India, despite having SARC established so long ago, it hasn't functioned. We tried BIMSTEC, we tried others, we tried multilaterals centered around some spheres of influence. And this is, I'm talking not only as an academic, but also as a practitioner and where I was involved in some of the discussions. Because of that laggings, the laggings of South Asian leadership laggings, which do not integrate the region, the India-Pakistan rivalry, to be exact. The region has not got integrated. It is much more connected. And as I was saying in the last that Bangladesh, Sridhar Doctor book, it's on a global journey. Its identity is now getting global. It doesn't look into the region anymore because it has frustrated the Indian way of dealing with it, and then, or for example, the Chinese way of dealing with it, or any other nation in the region. This interconnected world, countries will not sit idle if the regional leadership is not there. The Myanmar problem happened. The Indian position is absolutely opposite to Bangladesh, and we are suffering. The Chinese position absolutely opposite to Bangladesh, which is a national security issue. What do we do? So these are very realistic things. So, being said, so then comes to the question of what is the current situation when the change happened. Now, there are two narratives which in my readings of what comes out from India, most media houses, there are two narratives which sort of gets a little bit, it appears to me, it is probably based on a small amount of thinking, not too much data. I work in a university with 15,000 students. So I also teach there. So I have a good sort of understanding of how the Gen Zs, which brought the change, think about. The first narrative is this event has persecuted the Hindus, or it is a religious dimension of it. I tell you, the Gen Zs do not take into account the religious bias. And that's what I'm saying, because I just finished my my class was just before a few minutes. I ended at 6 o'clock. And I have daily interactions with some of them who were, in a very active participation of many of this movement. But the question is, how are we historic romanticizing? Because we have a partition memory, as we saw webinar. We have of Hindus living in Bangladesh 47, 71, and that historic romanticism sort of shapes us what is happening in 2024. Trust me, it is not. The Gen Zs think themselves as a citizen, and then without the bias of religion. So that narrative of India's some quarter, not all. I've heard Suhasini Haldar and I've heard met some of them. They don't make that claim, but that claim is not going to by in any much. It will die down eventually, even if Trump tweets about it. Second is there is also another narrative that uh, Professor Yunus or the current administration was too much with the sort of the Democrats, and in the past he has criticized Trump. Yes, if you take that sample, that is an example, then you'll really have to take a lot of other European leaders. And don't forget, Professor Yunus is also a congressional medal winner. He's just not a Nobel laureate. So that narrative gets it doesn't get much of a credence in from my objective point of view, because it is not only about the narrative, it is also about the system that remains the multi-dimensional and multi-track relationship that Bangladesh or any country has with the United States. So it will not make much of a difference that if one stopped, will not. I was just watching one USA in Bangladesh, where they have launched it just last week, I think, which is about the participation of the youth in sort of how to voice their demands to the current interim government, and they're making it, canvassing about it all over the Facebook, and then so the U.S. engagement to sort of sensitize the youth or facilitate the youth. Not directly, but indirectly, maybe through funding. I'm not sure how that is done. That remains. So those kind of realities on the ground, the first being the Gen Z's nature. I don't think many Indians understands thinkers, those who commentary, except few, those who are not indirectly in touch with the how the Gen Zs in Bangladesh have operated and have thought about their ideas of what is their national identity, how do they view radically different than what I see, what I read in some of the quarters coming out there, and also about how the relationship with the interim government will sort of unfold in the future. So with those, I don't see outcome could definitely. I mean, so then we need to sort of come up with some solutions. I think as a region, if we think, we should revitalize the SARC immediately. And that is what would be one of our strength, not only for small countries like Bangladesh, but also for India. Because Indian foreign minister went to Pakistan to attend the SCO after a long time. The SARC is still in limbo, is still dead. We need that platform come alive and also function, giving some leverage to the leaders, claim what they want to be in the region. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. The countries will be global. They will continue engaging with the global partners. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Raid. And now I want to like to have your short comments on the, there is a lot to discuss and there's a lot more questions from the regional perspective, but due to the time limits, we can't do it here. Just your short comments on the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the Trump administrations and the West Asia conflict. How do you see that is going to end or limit? What are your thoughts on this? Yeah, Ambassador Singh. Yeah, Ambassador Singh, you are muted. Ambassador, you are muted.
You're asking me? The question is addressed to me? Yes? Okay, thank you. So, on the Ukraine crisis and the West Asia crisis, Trump has said he creates peace, not war. So, he will form evidence. Now also, he has spoken to Zelensky and not spoken to Putin, but spoken to other people, spoken to the Europeans. I think there is already a movement based on his reputation to see the Ukraine crisis go to a conclusion. I mean, you look at the German Chancellor, despite all his internal problems, the way he's been speaking to Zelensky and Putin after a long gap means that now people are engaging much like India has engaged. So I think there is going to be a movement towards ending the war, because I don't think the United States wants to keep pumping money into Ukraine for no particular reason. I think the United States would like to stop the war and wean Putin away from China, so that then the Americans can deal with China on its own and not deal with China, Russia, North Korea altogether, which has many complications for Japan, for India, for many others. On West Asia, I think, when Trump started the Abraham Accords and then came, Biden continued them, I think he is not going to back away from Israel. But I think he wants peace to return because he does not want to get involved in a hot war. So I think the gap, the window that Israel had to settle matters is coming to an end. When Trump administration takes over, and already you notice, he announces an ambassador for Israel very quickly, means that we are now going to put you in your place and you can't do what you like without listening to us. That is the message going to Israel. So I think assertion of American power, not letting the tail wag the dog, is something that we will see from the Trump administration. But I don't think these are all necessarily linked to each other. They're independent actions, and we should draw sustenance that if he settles them, he may have more time for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Ambassador Singh. Professor Sato, yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree with Ambassador Singh that the Trump administration will really activate its plan to bring an end to the ongoing conflict over Ukraine. And I think Ukraine will come under very strong diplomatic pressure to, accommodate some of the Russian agenda in the final solution. And that will free up the US attention in the region, and US can spend more attention on the issue with China and the potential crisis over the Taiwan Straits and so forth. So that's more likely to happen. And but the ambassador said, well, if US solve the relationship problem with Russia, then maybe US will cut the deal with China. Yes, that's possible if you look at the pattern of the earlier US administration under Nixon. That's exactly what the US did, driving a wedge between China and Russia, but making deals with both parties. But so far, I haven't seen it yet. The sign that the US is ready to seek kind of negotiated settlements on the ongoing issues, and especially on the issue of Taiwan. The Trump has repeatedly said, Taiwanese have to defend themselves, and they sell, the stolen semiconductor technology from the US and so forth. despite all those rhetorics, I think there is a significant enough concern within the US defense circle and also diplomatic circle, which says, Mr. Trump, but, Taiwan is not only about Taiwan, the entire alliance credibility for the US rests on America's Taiwan policy. And for that, if not the clear commitment, actually the ambiguity needs to be maintained. But in fact, what Trump is doing is making a clarity into the opposite direction compared to the clearer commitment. He's sending the message of abandonment, which is really a dangerous thing in the Taiwan Straits.
Thanks, Professor Sato. I'm glad that you touched upon the Taiwan and the abandonment kind of quote the words on the alliance and on the Taiwan, looking at the Taiwan, that how that will be a growing contentious issue in the South China Sea, how Taiwan will defend itself, because as we know, the prediction for 2027, there's a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. So let's see, there is more to come. And then now the last comment from Dr. Zaid. Dr. Zaid, over to you.
All right. So the first and foremost, as a South Asian, what I would like to see and the way forward under a Trump administration or a new administration, which is highly unpredictable, is get our acts together, both at home and in the region. And for that reason, I would strongly see revived SARC, which gives us strength, revived in national institutions, which sort of makes the national consciousness work out and play, and the governments are more accountable to their own people. With those kind of institutional building, both at the domestic level and at the regional level, you actually can make the cost of unpredictability and safeguard your regional interest at the same time the national interest. So that's the first point. Second, yes, there is an aspiration of India, and that's a reality, and we need to value the region needs to value some of these aspirations. That he wants to, India wants to be a great power in the region, but at the same time there is a reciprocating reality also, which in this world with small nations, that they can be really beneficial to that cause of particular countries. For example, a city-state, and how strong and vibrant that country is, adding to the strength of all the regional forums. So that reality has to be born into the Indian mindset and policymakers as well, instead of getting into the vicious circle of old historic romanticism that I was alluding to previously. So relative and operative tone will not work with countries like the small countries around the region, and it has not worked historically. If you read the history of Bengal from Sultan period, even medieval period, it hasn't worked in that context. So those are the sort of regional and domestic realities. Moving ahead, we need to be cautious, calculative, and also pragmatic. So with that concluding remarks, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to respond because
yes,
I think Professor Zayed has said this more than once. I let it go the first time. So you see, his own thesis that you need a sense of trust in South Asia is belied by the Bangladeshis suddenly waking up to the importance of SARC after the fall of Sheikh Hasina. The SARC has not worked because of lack of trust with Pakistan. And India is trying to work with others on BIMSTEC, and Bangladesh is the host of BIMSTEC. We find it extremely intriguing that now Pakistan has become the savior of justice for Bangladesh, whereas the organization that they are host to, they don't mention. So I will leave it there. But secondly, I think the broader thing needs to be understood. India is an emerging power. Whatever happens in Bangladesh or any other country is not going to set us back. So if you have any such ambition, please disabuse yourself of. This is an inexorable rise, which happens to countries at different times of history. Secondly, countries who took anti-Indian positions did not take long to come back to friendship with India on a pragmatic basis. Like Maldives, Sri Lanka has elected a president whose party was consistently anti-Indian, and yet they deal with us. Now, for that matter, even with the Yunus government, India has not tried to openly criticize them. We are engaging with them. Long-standing demand of buying electricity from Nepal through the Indian grid, never done in Hasina's time, has been done now. India is continuing to play its quiet diplomacy without rancor with Bangladesh. Bangladesh needs to tone down its megaphone diplomacy and constantly be seen as a votary of Pakistan in South Asia. It will serve them better. Thank you.
I think just a quick remarks. I think this sort of proves just what Ambassador Singh was saying, that there is an obsession in the Indians of seeing the South Asia through their rivalry relationship with India, with Pakistan. Sort of takes the region back. Actually, the revival of SAARC, if I remember correctly, has been an issue for a long time back, not just now. So, but that psyche that everything in the region for Indians, or not all, but some, is processed through their lens to Pakistan, it's something that needs to, get rid of. That's one way of thinking it. But the reality is almost all the things, and I've been meeting a number of Indian scholars, thinkers, and interacting today, and they're very pragmatic in the sense about the region to grow as a whole, not sort of get into that kind of biased view of what an assertive view, much more assertive view, and then okay, what the others should do. For the pragmatism from the Bangladesh side, yes, there are also hawkish elements who would sort of provoke some which makes the news, and that gets resonated in some way. By and large, those people, those who are with the thinking of a balanced regional growth, would find out there are reasons for which we can cooperate and become more progressive as a region, and also as well as a country. India doesn't need to be that assertive, big brotherly, which is and then the word used, megaphone diplomacy, is a coined word of some of that sort of way of criticizing the US government. Those are realities, because as I say, social life is interpreted. The way think the world, I'm not seeing the world same way. My lens is not through Pakistan. My lens is through the region where we haven't comparison of South Asian region.
But you don't answer my question. Why don't you look at BIMSTEC?
Yeah.
You keep saying SAARC. You haven't heard you say BIMSTEC even once, though Bangladesh is the host of BIMSTEC.
Yeah, Dr.
Why don't you
Jahid.
work with BIMSTEC?
You must remember.
Let's conclude this.
Yeah,
Dr. Jahid, let's conclude it on this point that we will have the next discussion maybe on the SAARC and the South Asia, and